Hey guys, and welcome back to Now for Something a Little Bit Different. I am joined as usual by Mr. Cool himself, Mr. Korean Cool, Mr. John Nance. Welcome back, buddy. Good to see you.
Welcome, hello, and man, this weather sucks.
It does. I'm going to call you Mr. Extra Cool today because I don't know about you, but here in Jersey, I think it's a high of 19 degrees.
Oh no, we're less than that. I think we're at like 18 or something.
Yeah, and like we have like 10 inches of snow outside, literally. That's calling my
Yeah,
name, saying, "Hey, get your old ass out there and start shoveling, old man."
yeah. So, folks, yeah, we're recording this the day with this snowstorm hits, and man, it's been a walloper. We had a lot of snow.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, it's changing to that sleet, right? I swear, it's like little balls of ice, and
yeah.
it's just coming down. I poked my head out just before we started, and it's coming down like man, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, no, good old winter, man. You know, the thing is, it's funny. I think, I don't know if hopefully I'm not repeating myself. I didn't mention this before. I used to joke around when I was younger because in Jersey, we have a huge population of senior citizens. And, you know, they're sensitive to everything and they complain about everything. And sometimes they're a pain in the ass. When I was younger, I used to make fun of them and used to be like, these fucking senior citizens, man, they're always complaining about being cold and they're complaining about this, that, and the other thing. And well, I'll tell you what, as a 51-year-old man with arthritis, in fucking 19-degree weather and just thinking about the snow that I have to shovel, suddenly I have a little bit more perspective. I don't need to be in Florida or California, but you keep the snow. I don't want anything to do with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't mind it so much. The wife, she hates it, but
Yeah.
what do you do? What do you
Yeah.
do?
But today, guys, is a pretty exciting episode because we're finally getting back. Yes, we're getting back to the world of comic books. And my love for comic books is probably at the same level as my love of film. And I know you probably share a similar sentiment as well. So today we're going to be talking about a graphic novel that's done by a husband and wife team. Now, that's not something you see very often. It's a comic book that goes back all the way as far as 1978. We're going to be talking about Elfquest by Richard and Wendy Pini. And we're going to be talking about the first graphic novel called Fire and Flight. And that covers the first, we said, what, 6 issues, I believe? I
I
think. Yeah.
believe
Yeah.
five issues. First
five.
5 issues.
Listen, I'm a huge fantasy fan. I've told people before, I started with The Hobbit and then the addiction just grew from there. I'm really excited. I'm not going to lie. I was even a little bit intimidated because there's just so much lore and so
Oh
much
gosh.
world building in this world of ElfQuest. Before we get into the actual story, I'm going to talk about some behind the scenes stuff. And then, of course, if I miss anything, Mr. Korean Cool, being the master samurai editor, will no,
Whoa.
exactly. We got to joke around here, guys. It's cold, wintry day. You know, got to have some fun. So this comic book appeared originally in Fantasy Quarterly all the way back in February of 1978. Fantasy Quarterly was one of these like almost like an anthology comic book. They would have different fantasy stories by different people, and they would kind of stick them together. And you know, you'd get a little taste of this world, and you get a little taste of another world. Like David Cerebus, who did the comic book, I want to say, what is that? The aardvark one, Sim. I want to say he did a story in there, and there was another
Wait,
writer.
you're talking about Kerberos?
Oh, yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Kerberos.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
He's in that Drawn and Quarterly issue #1, along with Richard and Wendy Pini. That he was one of the stories. So as it goes, the story is apparently this Fantasy Quarterly did not do that great. The stories were well received, but it didn't do that great. And literally, they went out of business shortly thereafter. That year, when the Richard and Wendy Pini figured out, well, what am I going to do next? So in August of '78, they started their own company called Warp Graphics, and they did something that wasn't hugely popular back in '78. They self-published the world of underground comic books like Robert Crumb, and you know, you had stuff like Fritz the Cat. Will Eisner, I think, a couple of years earlier, had done a contract with God. So there had been some stuff there that kind of paved the way, but still, it was still a big risk because obviously, if you're self-publishing, you know, you're putting out all the expenses, you're putting out all the costs, and you know, your time. Luckily, that caught a foothold, and it did enough. It did pretty well, enough to propel them to do more issues. Before I go a little bit further, though, I'm going to talk a little bit, just briefly, about each of these two people, Richard and Wendy Pini. Wendy Pini was originally Wendy Fletcher before she married her husband. She was born in San Francisco in 1951. And at a young age, she developed a talent and love for illustrating and writing, taking inspiration from people like Shakespeare, Jack Kirby, Walt Disney, and even Japanese people like Osamu Tezuka. And then with Richard, a little bit slightly different situation. He was born, believe it or not, in 1950 in New Haven, Connecticut, went to MIT, and of all things, he got a degree in astrophysics. As the story goes, he was always a fan of sci-fi, and then he became interested in comic books when he was at the college level. And this is where things get kind of neat. Of all places to meet your future wife, he met Wendy when he read a letter that she wrote. She wrote in a letter to the Silver Surfer, issue number 5. And basically, I guess he got her contact information, and they corresponded for over 4 years, eventually met up, started dating, and ended up marrying in 1972. An interesting side piece of trivia is apparently Wendy would often dress up as Red Sonja and go to comic book conventions when she was younger. So, like I said, the first Elfquest story Fired in Flight appeared in 78, like I said, in Fantasy Quarterly. At the time, it was printed on newsprint, which is really cheap. It just didn't give off the best presentation when you're trying to present this whole new world, this whole new fantasy world, you know? Sometimes I think in some underground comic books and stuff like the indie comics, the black and white, I think it looks good for the story that you're trying to tell. Like if you're trying to tell like a film noir type of story, or even like later, many years later, you remember like Sin City, how they would use the heavy black and white for most of it, and then they would pop out with different colors.
Yeah, because you got to remember, even back then, right, color printing was limited to, what was it, the 4-color process, right? Yeah. What you might want to have come out in a specific color pattern or color range or color hue, you weren't going to achieve it.
After that whole thing with Drawn Quarterly, they published through their own. They started Warp Graphics. And over the years, it's been reprinted and published. First, it started with Father Tree Press, which is their own company. It was an offshoot of Warp Graphics. And then over the years, here's what's interesting, guys. I heard a recent interview with Richard Pini, and he said the issue they had, and this happens today too, if you're a hardcore collector. I don't collect individual issues, very rarely. So what ended up happening is they became successful, but then let's say issue number 3 would have a limited run. You'd have these comic book shops charging ridiculous prices. So they were running into an issue where he was seeing the fans not being able to get back issues. So the idea of presenting it in a graphic novel format, it was an affordable way for your average fan to access back issues. And he said part of the reason the comic book would be published by different publishers over time is, they'd strike a deal, for example, with Marvel Comics, like during the 80s. That's when I remember seeing it like at my local 7-Eleven and being in shock. But Marvel had the rights to it for X amount of time. DC had the rights to it. Finally, I think the last people, and I could be getting some of my facts wrong, so I apologize in advance. The last person to have the rights to publish it is Dark Horse Comic Books. Right. And Dark Horse put out this beautiful graphic novel. And they were talking about, in the interview I was watching, Richard and Wendy Pini were talking about how this is their favorite incarnation of the graphic novel reprints, because in this particular one, they were able to go back and do so much with the technology, like recolor things and just change the lettering. They were just to go back and able to give everything some extra, as the old expression goes, spit and polish, you know what I mean? Right. And really shine it up. And I will say I have 2 of those graphic novels that Dark Horse reprinted, Volume 1 and Volume 2, and they're both beautiful. Before then, if you guys can see this, and I know my camera isn't the best, you can see in the background I have a bunch of Elfquest graphic novels. Originally, when I picked it up at my local comic book shop, I bought the first graphic novel at the time. This was Warp Graphics, Book 1, and I became hooked on it, guys. It was absolutely amazing. And since then, I've picked up almost the entire series with the exception of the last big story arc, which is called Final Quest. I kick myself because the year before I started reading Elfquest, guys, I was working at my local comic shop briefly. They were trying people out. They could only afford to hire one part-time person. I did it for like maybe a month. And in that month, guys, guess who was there to autograph Richard and Wendy Pini. So I missed the opportunity to meet them, shake hands with them, and go, hey, you autograph all my books like a big nerd. Dark Horse is the last person to publish. They're still putting out the books, and they're going to publish the rest of the series through Dark Horse, from what I understand. It also spawned 3 novelizations. And I couldn't find these, but I actually used to own them, at least 1 or 2 of them. They spawned a novelization of Journey to Sorrow's End, The Quest Begins, and Captives of the Blue Mountain. Our buddy Troy mentioned this. I didn't know about this at all. They spawned a role-playing game, like a Dungeons and Dragons dice and paper game. Yep. And, I played D&D because I'm a big nerd, like most nerds in my high school years. Exactly. 2nd edition AD&D. But I never ventured out. I didn't even know that existed. Have you ever played the Elfquest RPG back in the day?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I forgot. One of our friends owned it. She bought it, and we tried it out. Not to be rude, okay? So it wasn't like fully fleshed out.
Oh, okay.
But it allowed you to jump into the world of Elfquest, become one of Cutter's crew. So it was fun. We had fun.
Yeah, it was worth it. And now I guess he said they're republishing it, I guess.
Gonna have to spend some more money.
Yeah, I know, right?
Okay, no problem.
But so it's interesting how far this world spawned. This is another one that completely throws me off. They even spawned a folk album music that I called Reflections, which is interesting. I'm going to have to check out YouTube and or Spotify and see if I can track that down. And then back in, I want to say 2022, they released an audio dramatization, multiple actors. You got music, you got a narrator. Like, you feel like you're actually like experiencing it.
Think of it, folks, as kind of like in the early days, right? Where there was no TV. You had those radio shows like The Shadow and all that good stuff, Little Annie. Now, here's a question for you guys, because I don't know if you have it in your notes. So they had the role-playing game. Yeah. But did you ever play the board game?
Oh, no, I didn't. I bet if I go on eBay, somebody probably wants $1,000. Probably wants like $600 for it, though.
Yeah. This is how much of a geek club we had. We actually had the board game. I believe it came out. It was either 85 or 86. I can't remember exactly, but there was an Elfquest board game. It was kind of like your first foray. If you ever played any of the SSI video games or any of the board games that had like the little hexes on it, it was all right. But it wasn't nothing like the role-playing game, right, where we could really act it out.
Yeah, I had no idea. And that's funny because I did Google, I know it's Google, and it's a combination of Google, Wikipedia, a couple of different things, but I didn't know about that one at all. That's awesome. Oh, yeah. They also did other stuff besides Elfquest. They did a futuristic adaptation of all things, The Mask of the Red Death, as a graphic novel. I love the Poe story, and I love Corman's adaptation of that. So I'm definitely curious about that. And then back in the day, I remember it being popular for a period of time. I never actually watched it, but the show Beauty and the Beast, they actually did a graphic novel series based off of that as well. That they have branched out into other areas. I think this is the thing that people most know them for, though.
Elfquest became so popular, I cannot for the life of me right now remember the issue, but I know there was an issue of X-Men where Kitty Pryde was wearing an Elfquest t-shirt.
Oh, that's awesome.
Throughout the comic issue. So it was like, oh, here we go.
Dude, I love when little Easter eggs like pop up like that. Like, I'm not going to lie, dude. I remember back in the 90s, I would watch the reruns of Roseanne. I never caught it during prime time. And at one point in time, one of the main characters one day popped up and he was wearing, of all things, and I didn't expect this at all, a milk and cheese t-shirt. I mean, that's like completely indie. That's like so indies. Nobody knows about it except for a handful of people that are really into like underground indie comics from the 90s. Now, these are mostly the main titles. I'll just mention them real quick. I might be missing something, but they had Elfquest, the original quest, Fire and Flight, Siege at Blue Mountain, which is Volume 2, Volume 3, which is Kings of the Broken Wheel, Hidden Years, Shards, The Searchers and the Sword, The Discovery, The Final Quest, and something called Stargazer's Hunt, which I still have to read that one. That and Final Quest are the two that I'm missing.
So, I mean, the only other thing that I can think of, and it's again because of Comic-Cons, right? I don't know if you caught the news, but last year, 2025, the Big Apple Con, the New York Comic Con.
Oh yeah, they were there. Yeah,
Richard and Wendy Pini were inducted into their Harvey Awards Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's awesome, dude. And apparently,
Yeah.
I didn't know this. Also, in 2019, they were inducted into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Yeah, so they got the big ones checked off, man. I mean, that's like winning an Oscar and a Golden Globe. You know, usually you get
But better. They're the epitome of when you have a dream and you have a vision and you have a story to tell, don't let anyone tell you you can't do it.
No.
They got started so long ago, I think you said 1978, right? It came out. So figure she's had this in her brain for years before then, right? Probably before I was born.
Yeah.
It is now come almost full circle with induction into the Eisner and Harvey Halls of Fame.
Yeah.
They are still around. They are still prolific. They have still spawned so many little communities of Elfquest. Wow, what you had is a little dream. You just had to have a story to tell, to see what it has brought to fruition up till now, 2026. They're still going. Elfquest is not going away anytime soon. And is just, again, a reaffirmation that if you have a dream, you have a story, you have a comic, you have a show, you have a movie, you want to put out to the world, work on it. Doesn't matter how long you work on it. Doesn't matter how long it takes.
Yeah.
Once you get it out there, it's out there. It's now you've birthed it to the world. Elfquest is the embodiment of what you can do if you just follow your dream and your aspiration of what you want to tell.
So just for an example, if you're someone that has artistic ability or ability to write a good story and you want to do a comic book, I'm not saying it's easy to do these days. You can put together a digital self-published comic book. I'm not saying there's not effort that's involved and there's still not creativity involved, that you have more tools at your disposal to make that dream a little bit easier on you. Whereas back then, they didn't have those things, man. So much more of an arduous task, to especially when they were self-publishing.
You know, and not to like brag or anything, but you know, to your point, you know, sometimes you just gotta take that leap of faith and do it. You know, I wanted to draw comic books. I wanted to be, you know, I used to draw quite a bit. Mm-hmm. To the point, one of our local comic shows we had here around here in Maryland, I submitted a piece of artwork for like their art contest.
Oh wow!
I took second place.
Damn, dude, that's awesome.
You know, yeah, life happens. Like I said, I'm now more into the I hate databases. Sometimes I really hate IT. Instead of drawing comic books, it was kind of, again, an affirmation that, you know what, I do have some talent.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Other people there, the judges who were all independent, they liked what I did. I could only imagine, you know, but at the same time, too, I will always, just like I tell my kids, right, I can't look back and keep going over those life of regrets, right, because I still have a future. I got chapters to write still. So who knows?
You never know, dude. You might find time for it still. At the end of the day, we're still young, man. So there's still time to go after those dreams, man.
Yeah. I mean, I still got my sketchbook, you know, so I still do some stuff, you know. Elfquest, again, is just another affirmation that says, you know what, just do it, right? Nike, excuse my language, screw Nike. You know, they're the original ones that say, just do it, right? Because you never know. And even if, you know, it doesn't do anything or go to the levels or heights some other stuff does, some of the other indie stuff does, the thing that you can say is, I did it.
Absolutely, dude. Absolutely. I mean, we're going to eventually have him on, but a mutual friend of mine, that's a local guy. He's a journalist here in town for a local paper. You know, he's about our age, and for several years he's been doing writing and stuff like that. And he hooked up with the right people, and he a couple months ago he published a comic book, just the first issue, and he also published a novel of short stories. But the point is that even with everything going on, just like, you know, wife, kids, the whole nine, still did it, man. You can still do it, man. So with that said, I figure at this point, we'll get right into the story, the meat of the story, guys, of Volume 1, Fire and Flight. The story opens up, and we're introduced to a world that's very similar to our own, to planet Earth, but set, and I would say maybe prehistoric times, or maybe even beyond that. We open up and we see a tribe of men. Just think of a tribe of men, old men, and people drenched loincloths, and they're dancing around a fire, and they're paying tribute as they're chanting to their god, Gotara.
Otherwise known as Saturday Night at Troy's.
So, these tribesmen, they're very primitive. They're about to make this sacrifice. And in this fire, we see chained up, we see what appears to be a red-haired elf, and his name is Red Lance. I always think about these tall, noble creatures, right? When you think of elves. And these elves, they're much smaller in stature, but they're fierce looking. They're badasses. So it was a really interesting take just right off the get-go when I remember reading that for the first time and going, hold on a second. This isn't the traditional fantasy elf that I'm used to seeing conveyed. And it's not Santa's elf. It's not a Keebler elf. What the hell do I have in front of me here? So we go from that sequence. And then next we cut to a flashback sequence several years earlier. And what we see is from the sky, we see this crystal looking castle land down, and it's all colorful and bright. And out of this crystal palace, we see emerge elves, but these elves are the traditional elves. They're taller in stature. We see these little pixies that are in the background, flying in the background, and we see trolls, typical representation of your fantasy troll. And basically, they get out of this palace, and they're just kind of like taking in the environment. They see a man for the first time. And now this man is not unlike the first man, but an earlier version. This is more like a caveman, this guy. They go to approach him and to introduce themselves. And what are they met by? They're met by being brutally attacked, with several of the elves being killed, basically. The rest flee in terror, never to return back to their palace home. Over the years, what we find out is the elves kind of evolve. They're really setting up this really cool story, I think, right from the get-go, with this really cool world building. When you were reading it for the first time, you had probably read it a little bit earlier because you actually read it in the comic book format. What were you thinking if you think back to your first time experience reading it as a kid?
Elfquest, what I can recall, Elfquest was unlike any other rendition or variation of elf or elves as we had known it as kids. Again, folks, you see my shirt, right? That's what we were doing in the 80s, Dungeons and Dragons. And as you said, you had your typical elf stereotype, based off of what Dungeons and Dragons had. And then here comes Elfquest. All of a sudden, you're thrown into a world like they're riding wolves. What is going on here?
Yeah.
That it was after the first issue, second issue, third issue. That was it. The word spread around our little gaming group, our little nerd cult, right there on Fort Meade. That, man, this was something that we had to pay attention to.
This is something different and something special. So we cut back to the present day, and Red Lance, like I said, he's about to be sacrificed in the bushes. We see two elves, and we're introduced to them. One is Cutter, and Cutter is a really interesting character because he if you look at him, you can see some of the Japanese influences Richard and Wendy Pini had, because his hair is tied back in a knot, and he's dressed almost in a way reminds me of like an ancient samurai or something along that lines. And his buddy Skywise, they're basically looking in there or watching what's about to take place. And then from there we cut, and a group of elves charge in riding wolves. They basically save Red Lance from being sacrificed. And Cutter, he manages to kill one of the humans. So they go back to their home, which they call the Holt. When they get back there, Red Lance is greeted by his
life mate,
excuse me, Nightfall. She tends to his body, and she tries to comfort him and get him to heal. Meanwhile, Cutter and the rest of the group are reflecting on what happened. And of course, Cutter's, telling, Red Lance, kind of lecturing him like, hey, we always say never to get too close to where the humans are. But while this conversation is taking place, the barbaric men in their village are mourning over the loss of this one human that died. They're plotting revenge. They said, we must be rid of these vicious elves for once. We're going to burn them out of the village. They sneak up where the Wolfriders live. Just as they're getting close, Skywise, Cutter's friend, manages to see them in the distance. Cutter does this thing where he reaches his head, and it's like almost like telepathy, basically. It's called sending. And he sends to his Wolfriders, danger is near, men are coming. They have a confrontation with the men, and he said, what are you doing? You're going to burn the whole forest down. And what does the man respond? He responds viciously by saying, I don't care. I'll burn the whole forest down, you in it. they're put in this situation where the whole fire becomes ablaze and they have nowhere to go. They find this cave with this rock covering it. They knock on it, and they're introduced to a troll named Picknose. And Picknose is one of the guards. Basically, is what do you want? What do you want? It's not time to trade. And he's like, we need in. He basically tells them there's a fire. We're coming in, whether you like it or not. They're eventually brought into the main chamber of the cave, and they're introduced to the king of the trolls, Greymung. Greymung is this big, gigantic troll, kind of grumpy, what you'd expect from a troll, but he's infuriated. How dare you enter my kingdom? What's going on? Listen, the forest is on fire. We need shelter for right now. And Greymung says, we'll have none of that. You don't belong here. And he's like, remember when we saved your ass? We gave you medicine when your trolls were sick, traded for you with our pelts and our meat. We hunted for you because you couldn't come out of your cave because you were afraid of the sun. We get an exchange between Cutter, the leader of the Wolfriders, and Greymung. It leads to an argument. While this is happening, Skywise sees this rock by Greymung, and he's attracted to it. And Greymung takes his arm and takes a swipe at him to move him out of the way. Cutter reacts, get off my friend, and takes his scimitar out, and he cuts into the rock, and he takes a piece of it and gives it to Skywise. Basically, they find out this rock is called the Lodestar. It's a magical rock from the sky. It's almost like basically a magnet, essentially, guys. So this only continues to piss off Greymung. He argues with Cutter, and Cutter says, hey, listen, we're just looking for another place to go because our forest is burned down. And Greymung goes, as he smiles evilly, he goes, say no more. I know just the place. And of course, one of his henchmen, Picknose, the guard, goes, but boss, are you sure? And then he elbows him like, shut up, indicating that there's more to this magical place, this safe haven. Cutter and his Wolfriders are kind of stuck in this situation where they don't have a lot of options. Over the course of the next few days, they travel through these dark tunnels. At the end of one of the tunnels, they see a golden light. They tell one of the elves, the elder elf, Tree Stump, you stay here with the guard Picknose. We're going to go up ahead and make sure it's safe. And when they get to the end of the cave, they're blinded, guys, because they're blinded by the sun. And what do they see? They see nothing but miles and miles of sand. So before they can turn around, we see Tree Stump fall to the ground, and the caves just basically falls in on itself. There's a landslide, and all these rocks fall down, covering the exit. He almost gets hurt, but he manages to get out just in time. They're stuck in a no-win situation. What are they going to do? They can't turn back. So they come up with a plan. They're going to travel at night and hope that if they keep on traveling, they'll eventually come across green grass and water. They're down to practically nothing in water. They only have a little bit of food. So they travel by night. And guess what, guys? Nighttime, it's freezing beyond anything they've ever experienced. The break of dawn, the sun comes out and the sun is blazing. So they make little tents and they try to come up with a little shelter, but the sun's beating down on them. You see the wolves panting. Everybody's not doing too well. Even Red Lance, who got injured, is not doing well at all. And night falls by his side. And eventually, one night in the distance, Skywise notices far, far in the distance, he sees what appears to be some mountains. He tells Cutter of this. They see these mountains in the background, and they're like, guys, we can make it. If we can just reach those mountains, there's got to be water and grass and something to find some sort of shelter and survive. But they also realize their friend Red Lance's injuries have gotten to the point where he just can't move. Nightfall, his life mate basically stays behind with him. And Cutter says, as soon as we get to where we're going, then we'll come back for you and send help and rescue you. So they have to make that tough decision, So they struggle for the next couple days. And eventually they reach the base of the mountain and they see these strange plants. And in America, we would call them cactus. Cutter takes out his scimitar, just curious, and he cuts it open and he realizes there's a liquid in it. And what it is it's basically, there's water. So there's finally some relief. So all the Wolfriders and all their wolves, they drink as much of it as they can. But Cutter realizes that this is just a temporary break in the storm, if you will. So along with Skywise, he ascends the mountain. And when he reaches the top, him and Skywise, lo and behold, they see a village with houses made out of rock structures. And we see elves. they're in shock because they thought they were the only elves in this world. These elves, they're all very dark skinned, like I said, and they've made a home in this environment. Skywise goes to Cutter and he says, well, how are we going to approach this? What are we going to do? And Cutter says, we're going to just go in there and take what was rightfully ours. And Skywise looks at him and he's like, are you sure that's the right thing to do? And he's like, listen, the trolls tricked us, the humans tricked us, and we're just going to take what we want. Skywise, Cutter, and the rest of the wolves, they charge into the village. Cutter sees this one beautiful maiden. Her name is Leetah. She's talking to this other elf whose name is Rayek, who's this arrogant male who's trying to very aggressively flirt with her. She sees Cutter as he storms into this village, and she locks eyes with him. And
yeah, a little boing.
There's definitely some elf boners going around. No, but yeah, so there's this magnetism between the two. There's this instant almost connection of some sort. Basically, they grab, like Skywise grabs a piece of bread. They raid the village, basically. Cutter, being a barbarian, he just grabs this Leetah girl up in his arms and throws her over his shoulder. They flee into the mountains. Of course, these villagers are in shock. And of course, this Rayek, he's not messing around. And he thinks that girl Leetah is like basically his property, effectively. So what does he do? He rallies up the troops. Basically, Rayek goes after them. He manages to find Cutter and the Wolfriders because Leetah lets out a scream, and he's able to find where the Wolfriders are at. And he approaches Cutter, and they have a little bit of a scuffle. And finally, Leetah just says, "What do you want?" And he says, "Well, we just wanted food and shelter and stuff like that." But and she's like, "Well, that's not the way to do it." They managed to break the fight down between Rayek and Cutter. They go to the town leader, who's a older elf, a blind elf named Sun Toucher. And basically, he says, "Listen, we can help you. We're a peaceful group. We're not here to cause you any harm." He explains to them about their village, and basically he's here to help them. They don't mean them any harm. Meanwhile, Cutter says, or not one of our villagers, excuse me, one of our people still stranded in the desert. Do you have a healer? Because we need to go help. We find out Leetah is a healer in the village. So she, along with Rayek, reluctantly joins Cutter, and they get there just in time because we can see that Redlance is not doing really well. He's sweating. She lays her hands on Redlance, and she kind of goes into like a trance. He manages to gain enough strength to at least recover on his own from there. They get back to the village. The Sun Toucher tells them they are welcome to stay and rest. From there, they're brought in and they're introduced to the town elder, whose name is Sava. She's the mother of memory, and she's the oldest living elf in the village. She welcomes them to the village, Sorrow's End, and she's tall and regal, and Cutter actually mistakes her for one of the high ones. Because he says, "Are you one of the high ones? One of the ancient ones?" She's like, No, I have been around a long time. I'm old. She tells them when she was just a child, she actually crossed the desert with her tribe, just like Cutter did. And that's how they found Sorrow's End. She reassures Cutter they are safe. Basically, they're welcome to the village. There's a great celebration is held in their honor. And there's a feast and dancing. And of course, Cutter, of course, is still very smitten by this one elf maiden, Leetah, and he's watching her from a distance. He approaches her and draws her near as the two lock eyes yet again. And of course, arch nemesis, I will say, Rayek, the raven-haired elf, he's looking in the background and he's furious. You can see that he's infuriated by Cutter, and basically he's moving in on his property effectively. Over the next couple days, the Wolfriders make a new home in the mountains. Shen, Leetah's sister, tries to convince Leetah to visit the Wolfriders and basically just forgive and forget. But Leetah's not interested in what Shen tells her. Next, we see Rayek, and he's hunting a boar, and he locks eyes with it, and he does this thing where he kind of like hypnotizes the boar, and then he just kind of slits its throat, and that's how he hunts. What he doesn't know is Cutter is up above watching him, and he kind of swoops in on him. He says, "Oh, so that's how you hunt. You basically trick the animal." He's like, "You do your prey no honor when you take the fight out of it." And Rayek's philosophy is like, "Well, I do this because I spared the creature the pain of its death." Cutter says to Rayek, he says, is that how you plan to get Leetah? You plan on hypnotizing her? And then this is again Rayek, again aggressive with the aggressive personality. He says, stay away from her, barbarian. Don't you cross me, A couple days go by. Cutter starts to lose his appetite, and you can see the rest of his tribemen noticing this, and they can tell he's got love for this maiden, Leetah. So Skywise approaches him, his friend, and asks him, are you sure she's the one? She knows my soul name. In this lore of Elfquest, if you have someone that you love and they love you back, you know their name. There's their regular name, but then there's their special name that they don't tell anyone else except for the one that their life mate, the one they're going to spend their life with. Cutter says, I'll stake my life on it, that she knows my soul name, which is Tam. Skywise suggests that he talks to her, so he does. Cutter tries going up to her and very bluntly asks her, why does she deny the truth between them? She asks, what do you mean the truth? And he goes, well, in my tribe, we don't play games of the hearts. We just know that this is an exchange going on. She's like, well, my tribe is different. We don't do things like that. We get to know you a little better. It's not just this unspoken thing. Right after it, Rayek throws this knife right into the ground, just barely missing Cutter. Sava explains to Cutter that this is what they call a challenge wand. It's a rare occurrence that's only happened a handful of times in their village over the many, many years. It's basically when two members of the same tribe are interested in courting the same person. So what they do is they compete in these 3 different challenges to determine who has the right to court. And Sava asks Leetah, she said, before we start this trial, you can simplify this whole process if you know in your heart which one of these elves you're interested in courting. And they can skip the trial altogether. And of course, Leetah responds, she can neither choose nor refuse either one. So the challenge will go on because she can't figure out, she's not sure. And then we hear more details about this challenge. It consists of 3 tests, a test of strength, wits, and courage. The first trial begins the next day, and that's the trial of strength, balance, and agility. Both Rayek and Cutter are both blindfolded. They're placed on a device that looks almost like basically a seesaw, and their hands are kind of entwined. And the idea, obviously, is the person that gets knocked off loses the first trial. After a struggle, Cutter comes out triumphant in the first trial. So, hey, right off the get-go, he's doing good. For the second challenge, Sava takes them, and she blindfolds both of them, bounds them, and she puts them in a cave to disorient them. She also takes each one of their weapons and hides the weapons. And the whole point of this challenge is to obviously get out of the bound and the blindfold, find where your weapon is hidden, and then the first one back to the village is the winner. So this is where we learn a little bit more about the world of Cutter. We realize this sword that he has, this scimitar, is called New Moon, and he's very reluctant to give this up because it belonged to his father Bearclaw. It was something that was passed along to him. Skywise also gives him his magical necklace, the Lodestar necklace, as a gesture of good luck. Again, like I said, they're put in these caves, they're bound, they're blindfolded, they're gagged. Cutter, we see, eventually finds where his scimitar is hidden. It's hidden in this part of the cave where it's deep down below him, and he doesn't have arms that are long enough to reach the sword, so he's not sure how he's going to get the sword. We discover what a good friend Skywise is, because guess what? That Lodestar, it works in a way like a magnet. It literally catches the sword. He's able to get back to the village first. Now, while this is happening, we eventually see Rayek get his weapon. He uses his magic to get his sword because it too is also out of his way. He gets back to the village, and he's surprised to find out that not only did he lose yet again another challenge, but apparently Cutter's been there for a while. Cutter tells him how he did it, and he says, oh, you used magic, you cheated. Rayek cheated because Rayek used magic. You know what I mean? So he's being a little bit of a hypocrite. Finally, we get to the final trial, guys, I promise. Basically, Sava explains them for the last trial. It's called the Trial of the Heart. With this, they must overcome their greatest fear. And Cutter answers very quickly. He's like, oh, well, my greatest fear is keeping my Wolfriders safe. And she's like, no, that's not your greatest fear. And she touches him, and she's able to determine what his real greatest fear is. And she also does the same thing to Rayek. She has Cutter go first. She goes onto this mountaintop, and there's a bridge. It's called the Bridge of Destiny, and it's way, way, way up in the high above the sky. and it's very, very narrow. And she said, Cutter, in order for you to succeed in this challenge, you must cross this narrow bridge and touch this thing called the sun symbol. Come back. Cutter is nervous, and he says so much to Skywise, and Skywise says, oh, you got this. You've done heights before. It's like, yes, but never this high before. We see him try to cross this very narrow bridge, and about halfway through loses his footing and falls. But he manages to catch himself. He's too scared, so he goes back. And basically, he thinks he's lost the match. Rayek is making fun of him and saying, oh, I can't believe you couldn't do that. Basically giving him, he's doing some shit talking, guys. He walks on the bridge, but he's a show off. And he walks on the bridge backwards. He's walking the bridge. A big wind comes in. Now he loses his footing, and he barely manages to grab on with one hand to the bridge. And Cutter, showing his true character, he grabs him and he pulls him up. Rayek gets back safely to the other side. And Cutter's lying on this bridge on his stomach, and he's still nervous as all hell. But he takes a second and he calms. He gets up and very carefully and slowly goes to the other side of the bridge. He touches the sun symbol. He manages to win the third challenge. After winning the third challenge, and he's declared the winner, of course, Rayek walks off silently in rage. She explains to Cutter what Rayek's greatest fear was losing this challenge. Leetah tells Cutter he has not won her. The final decision is hers. Cutter upset. You cannot refuse recognition. No one can. Leetah says, recognition is more than blind instinct. I am many times your elder, and you have much to learn. So that night, Leetah tries to go to sleep, and we see her, and she's having nightmares. And in one of these dreams, we see her scream out, Cutter, Cutter. And then she screams out his name, his recognition name, Tam. She wakes up. She hears the howl of the Wolfriders. So curious, she approaches their camp from a distance, kind of hiding back hidden. And we see Tree Stump sharing a story about Cutter's father and former leader, Bearclaw. And basically was this fearless, headstrong, and sometimes reckless leader. But Bearclaw found love and recognition with Joyleaf, Cutter's mother. And that's also Tree Stump's sister. Joyleaf was calm and rational, who always turned Bearclaw's anger aside when entering battle. And she was the one that helped strategize and really kind of helped almost co-lead the Wolfriders at the time. She was basically a calm in an ocean of chaos. He tells a story about how their tribe was challenged once upon a time by this horrific beast called Mad Coil. And basically this beast also had the ability to send, like the Wolfriders do. The tribe was truly tested because they lost the healer in the group. And unfortunately, Bearclaw and Joyleaf both died after going through a very harsh battle fighting this Mad Coil beast. Ultimately, Cutter managed to kill the beast, but at a great loss because he lost both of his parents. And that's when he became the leader of the Wolfriders. After the story is over, Nightfall reminds Cutter that Bearclaw gave them a good life, but a hard life. And Cutter has given them a life in a new wondrous land with other elves of their own kind. Leetah sneaks away after hearing the story with a tear in her eye. And I think maybe she's able to see these people or these fellow elves as more than just these barbarians, that there is a culture there, that they do have their sense of honor. So over the course of the next few days, the two tribes get to know each other better and learn from each other. But one day, a scout sees in the distance a wild herd, and these creatures are called Zoots. And Zoots basically like these camel-like creatures. The village leader, Sava, tells them basically in the past, trample through the village, destroying many things, and afterwards they just have to rebuild. Cutter's like, well, that's nuts. We have to come up with a better game plan. What if we can stop these Zoots from coming in and destroying the village? They manage to divert them and basically capture them at a dead end. After this happens, Leetah consults with Sava, and she's starting to respect Cutter a lot more. But she tells Savage, she tells him, she confides in her. She's like, she has this unbearable need to be with Cutter, this longing, but she's also afraid because he's like a wild animal. Savage says, you're both headstrong, and you both have strong wills, but you both also possess remarkable qualities. One of the villagers, Dushine, is hurt by his wound because he gets loose. Leetah heals her. Afterwards, she goes and she finds Cutter, and she tells Cutter, she says, I will not live in a cave by day and howl at the moons by night. I still do not like you very much. Great way to enter the courting process. Cutter says, well, maybe we're too different. Maybe you can refuse recognition. Rayek would probably be a better choice for you, a better life mate for you. And Leetah says, you can barely think for yourself. Don't presume to think for me. And Cutter responds, well, if it makes you feel any better, I'm not sure I can live without you. This isn't sorrow's end, but sorrow's beginning for me. And she calls him for the first time. She calls him by his true name, his recognition name, his soul name, Tam. Leetah explains that her people have lost the ability to send. That's why he couldn't find her soul name, because she can heal, but they don't have the ability to send like the Wolfriders do. They finally, this epic love story, finally coalesces. Sava, the town leader, sends, because she still has that ability, to Rayek and explains that now Cutter and Leetah now are basically our life partners. He decides to venture out on his own journey of self-discovery to find his place in the world. Later that night, Skywise surprises Cutter by showing him a dreamberry bush he planted in the village. There's one little short story towards the end about Skywise, but it's just a minor footnote, and I figured it's really not worth mentioning. This is the bulk of it. Me and John were talking behind the scenes, and this book, I think it's like 180 or 195 pages, and there's so much to the world. We could literally talk about this first graphic novel. We could probably do 4 episodes on it. There's a lot more richness to it. There's a lot more character development. There's so many more characters that they give time to in the graphic novel. It's really epic in every sense of the word. So I'm going to turn to my buddy, Mr. Korean Cool, and I'll let you give me your thoughts, your general overall thoughts after revisiting this world and this graphic novel.
Well, thank you.
No, of course. Get out of here.
Elfquest, when you first brought this up, it was kind of like a blast. Well, it wasn't kind of. It was definitively a blast to the past, right? Because there are so many memories around collecting this comic. Living on Fort Meade, the mid-'80s, before I had to go to Germany. Our trips to the shopette, we'd all get on our bikes. Those were our wolves. And we'd go down to the shopette and we'd hope. We didn't realize then, comics come out at a certain cyclical cycle. We didn't know. We were just like every week we were down there just hoping for our comics, and especially Elfquest, as soon as we started getting introduced to that world. The beauty of was back in those days, we were doing the Dungeons and Dragons, right? We were doing the basic rule set. We did the advanced rule set. Seeing Elfquest come about, it was a wild journey. Who knew that the elves that we had, kind of thought of and known, to see this version of elves as done by the Pinis. What I kind of really remember about Elfquest was, again, us as kids getting on our bikes, our wolves, right? We were like Cutter and Skywise and everybody else.
Yeah.
We were going on our adventures because that's what we did as kids back in the day.
Yeah.
Right. We'd go on adventures and stuff. We'd go into the woods. And back then, I don't know how many other folks have experienced this, right? But living on that military base, right? We all had our little cluster of homes, right? That was our core group of friends. Yeah. In a way, that was kind of like our tribe, kind of like an Elfquest, right? So whenever we'd go meet somebody, there was always a leader, right? I happened to be kind of that leader in our little group living there on, in Thompson Court, right off of Inchon Street in Fort Meade. So there was a lot of parallels we were drawing to the Sunfolk, right? It really was kind of like that exotic thing, because again, as we're growing up and we're meeting new people, it was, wow, how do we deal with this, right? Do we go in like Cutter and his group, or do we be nice? It was always that back and forth. Growing up over the years and seeing the many versions of Elfquest, not to be negative, right? But to see several new versions of Elfquest basically be reprintings of the original series. I was a little disappointed, right? Because growing up, Elfquest was so much fun for us, right? One person would get the newest issue, they'd read it, they let somebody else, borrow it, kind of like we were our own little library with Elfquest comics. And then as we continue to grow up and see a lot more movies, right, you start seeing, wow, that kind of happened in Elfquest.
Yeah.
That kind of happened in Elfquest. Did they rip off Elfquest, right? Not so much every single detail, but the basic premise of the stories. Being kind of a history buff growing up too, it was kind of interesting to see, like you said, during the trials, just how many civilizations actually kind of had those type of trials.
Yeah.
Being from America, it was kind of like the North American, the Indians.
Yeah, Native Americans, yeah.
That had these trials of strength, right? To which, again, being kids, being fans, we were already kind of doing those, right? Back then they called it Indian wrestling, right? Where you had to throw one off balance, or folks, don't ask me why, but we would have that little game. You mentioned the quest or the challenge dart. Well, we had this little game, right, where we stood 2 or 3 feet apart, and we would have a screwdriver, and we'd have to throw it at our opponent's feet. And when it stuck in the ground, you had to shift your feet over until they, couldn't go any further, right? But nobody lost a toe, nobody got stabbed in the foot. But it was some of those things that we saw, right? And I don't know, I won't even proclaim to know that some of that stuff we got from Elfquest, right? But all I know is it was part of our childhood. Having collected the comics, right? For folks, just so you understand, this is issue number 1 of the Marvel run, right? Issues 1 of 32, which reprinted, pretty much all their original works, except they added color to these, right? And that's why I mentioned color, because in the black and whites, compared to the newest graphic novels, which used digital artwork, it's muted in a lot of ways, right? Where sometimes it takes away from it because, let's face it, in the 80s, that 4-color printing process, it wasn't always matching up, right? So you always had some shift in it, right? Which kind of takes away from the artwork. But I collected that. When Dark Horse, I can't find my issue number 1 and 2. It's in my collection somewhere. I just have it misnumbered. Yeah. But Dark Horse came out with the final quest. Holy crap, 2018, here we go. Let's go. Elfquest is back. Yeah. So, here I am, my late 40s. I'm still geeking out about Elfquest.
They've captured something magical that they want you to. You know what I mean? That's
exactly right. A good friend, a friend of mine that I grew up with on Fort Meade. We had lost touch over the years, but we found each other again through Facebook.
Oh, okay.
And she is. I'm not gonna say her name, folks, because privacy. I didn't ask for permission. But she, through some of her postings, she still talks about Elfquest. She was one of our group. Right? So here we are many years later talking about Elfquest. So let's talk about why it is special, right? It is a different story of the elves that we know and love. If you're a fan of The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings stuff, forget about it. Dungeons and Dragons, right? You have your half elves, you have your wood elves, you have your drow, the dark elves.
Oh, the drow.
Forget about it. This was something new with that mythos, with that legend of elves. However, humanistic, relatable in the sense of let's take Cutter and Leetah, because that's what we talked about primarily in this issue, right? 2 different worlds, but you finally meet, right? How do you deal with those interactions? How do you, especially when you like somebody, how do you go about it and expressing that, right? I went through that. Again, military family, we're moving all the time. I'm meeting people from different parts of the world, different backgrounds, I don't know. My whole life kind of revolved around Fort Meade, that group that I always had growing up. So it was always that relatable experience, right? The introduction of the lodestone. I'm sorry, you called it the lodestar. It was the it's okay. The lodestone, right? That little magical thing where people, Skywise always says it. I still say it's magic. That little introduction to realism, right? That here you are, you don't know what it is, but you think it's magical, right? We've all done that. We had a Rayek from a different court or a different part of Fort Meade, and we meet up, and it was always, always a little bit of butting heads, right? Because that's just the way it was back then. We didn't settle it with these challenges. It was like, oh yeah, let's play some kickball. Let's see who beats who. And that's kind of how we settled things. But it was always those journeys, those memories, the friends, the stories. Gosh, the times. Our court, in our court, we had like a little wooded area, like right in the dead center, right? Where it wasn't quite like it was only like, a 10-foot by 10-foot area, but it was enough to give a shade where we would all kind of sit and read our comics and talk about, oh man, I can't wait for you to read this. And once we pass it along and stuff, Lord knows we didn't know about comic collecting back then. Because like I said, we had soda and candy. We're just passing books back and forth. I remember
that all too well.
I wish you had known back then, dude. But again, I had thought I had gotten rid of this. But again, I'm sitting here with issue number 1. I still got it. Even though the final quest does kind of close the chapter out, right? It is a literary feat that, even though it took several years, the Pinis, Richard and Wendy, had an idea, they birthed it to the world, and they saw it go off like Rayek, right? When he finally goes off in the desert to, find his place. What is Elfquest after this? I don't know. All I know is it is part of me. It will always be part of me. Will my kids ever pick it up? Who knows? Bless the Pinis' heart. Yes, they, you mentioned it. Kept Elfquest out in so many formats, so many variations, so many reprintings, so many graphic novels, because they wanted folks to become part of their world.
Yeah.
We get no sponsorship. There is no money kickbacks or anything, but their website, elfquest.com, it has it all. It's for free. A great comic book is hard to come by. And Lord knows that in today's times, the dreck, the crap that's been coming out.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You got to kind of go back to when it was really good, when it was story. Hell, we mentioned it. I got how many episodes? When you want to tell a great movie or a great show, right? What is the thing that will keep audiences engaged and loving it and making it a memorable experience, right? It's the story.
Absolutely.
And Elfquest has one basic storyline, but so many sub-chapters, so many sub-stories, so many sub-variations of the basic premise, which is you got strangers in a new place. They just want to live. What happens along that journey? We've all been there. We move out. We move into somewhere new. We're in a new place. How do we live? How do we survive? Who do we meet? Do we get along? Are we enemies? Are we frenemies? Who knows? Who knows? Right. Elfquest. It lives here. It lives here. It's on the internet. So it's going to live forever. Bless the Pinis for coming this through. And thank you for, again, just, as we go into this, I mentioned it way back at the start. It's another affirmation that, you have a dream, you have a story that you need to get out, you need to tell. Just do it. None of us are a Rembrandt or a Van Gogh or a Stephen King or one of my favorite authors, a Terry Brooks. Tell your story. Show your story. Whether it, sells millions of copies or 10. The bottom line, the bottom takeaway is you had a dream, you had a vision, you had a story. You told it. Nobody can take it away from you.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, my friend.
Elfquest is one of the greatest comic books to have ever been spawned, including Spawn. From its beginnings as a simple black and white from a fantasy magazine to its current iteration from Dark Horse Comics to the reprints of these new graphic novels, to rebirthing the role-playing game. Yes, folks, well, we're going to, link back as much information as we can. Again, we don't get any kickbacks. We're not sponsored in any way. It's just pure love that when we have to share something, we're going to share it. And that's what Elfquest did. Elfquest shared the vision, the story, and the dreams that the Pinis had for us when we bought their comics. It was fantastic. I'm a fan, always will be a fan.
Oh, absolutely, brother. Absolutely. And, I mean, you said a lot of things I was about to say. I didn't discover it when I was a kid like you. I discovered it probably like the year after high school. I might have been like 18 or 19 and just falling in love with this rich world. I love developed characters. I like things that are not one dimensional. Don't get me wrong. I like a lot of stupid things like movies that are with one-dimensional villains and one-dimensional characters. So I don't want to contradict myself completely. But like when it comes to a good book or a good graphic novel or a good story, I like characters that are fleshed out. They have dimensions to them. I like world building. Even the romantic stuff, they handled it in a really good way. And I love the fact that they took the idea, again, to touch on what you said, this what we think in our minds of what a fantasy story represents, and then just completely turning that on its head. I'm almost at a loss of words because it's so hard to describe my love for this series. What I will say, guys, is the work speaks for itself. Even if I don't quite do it justice, even if you've never read anything by these guys before, or you've never read Elfquest, it won't cost you a dime to go on Hoopla. Check out that first book, that first graphic novel, and tell me afterwards if you don't fall in love with the world and the characters. And the first graphic novel we're talking about is just the tip of the iceberg. They're equally as strong in story. They're equally as strong with character development. They make characters that you connect with and that you care about and where you want to come back and see what's going to happen next. They become like a family member or a friend where you're invested in these characters. You're invested in this world. You're invested in seeing what's going to happen. And from a technical level, the artwork is gorgeous. I love it, man. I love the way she draws. I love the way she writes. You really just can't really go wrong with this world and these characters and this story. I remember reading, like I said, 18, 19 years old. They have a complex storyline. It's not just like your Saturday morning cartoon interpretation of like how that might be handled, which is, I think, part of the reason possibly why over the years it's come close to being a Saturday morning cartoon. It's come close to being an animated movie. But I think there's always been a little bit of pushback on the studio end of things, but also on the Pini's end of things, because I think from what I read in a lot of different attempts to make this an animated thing, there was a lot of studios that wanted to kind of turn it into like almost not I like the Smurfs, but almost like a Smurfs type of thing, or not like a Care Bears, but something that's a little bit more. Which there's nothing wrong with doing that, but with these characters in this world, if you take away the things that make these characters special and you strip it down to that level, you're diminishing the overall product. So I think that played a part as to why some of the animated movies and some of the animated series never came into fruition. Especially, like I said, in the 80s, because I think that's what would have happened.
Well, it would have happened because folks, that know in the industry, it's called the dumbing down for audiences.
Sure.
And the problem with Elfquest was the audience doesn't want it dumbed down, would not accept it being dumbed down. The only reason why you executives, hoity-toity people would want it dumbed down is because it's over your head. You don't get it.
I think they're not giving their audience enough credit, because even as a kid, I think they would have responded to the way it's represented currently. But I think they're thinking about dumb it down, so kids are definitely going to love it, and then we can sell action figures. Because let's face it, remember in the 80s when you were a kid, because you'd see the advertising, you'd be watching the Transformers, and then 30 seconds into the commercial break, you'd be seeing a Transformers advertising. You'd be watching He-Man, and as much as I love He-Man, you'd be seeing, every He-Man figure, Castle Grayskull, Snake Mountain, you know what I mean? And I think studio execs, like you said, they just focus on dumbing it down and how can we market it? How can we turn it into something that we can sell? And this world, you can't do that to. You insult your core fans, but also you're losing what's special about the world and what makes these characters so interesting and so compelling. But, I'm really glad we talked about this. I'm not going to lie. I mean, down the road, I would love to eventually visit Volume 2 or visit, more of the Elfquest world, because it does hold such a special place in my heart. But this one gets the highest of recommendations from me, guys. Definitely check it out. Thank you guys all for listening. I hope everybody stays safe out there this winter.
Please stay safe.
Stay safe, stay warm, drink your hot cocoa, read your Elfquest.
Yeah, I mean, if you got the internet, like I said, we're going to provide some links. You got lots of free places to read it. Get engaged because it is, again, magical. It was a fun world. And, you know, for those folks, well, I'm not a comic book reader. Those for stupid people. The complexities, the flawed characters. I think that was one of the beauties that we didn't touch on. Like every one of us, right? It's a wonderful story that keeps building upon itself. I would be hard-pressed to say anyone who gives it a fair shot, you know, didn't have some inkling or some measure of likability.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, that closes up our comic book episode for the weekend, guys. We can't wait to get back next month and talk about some other graphic novels you guys should be checking out. Thank you again, of course, as always, for listening and watching. And we look forward to talking to you guys soon. So I hope everybody has a great weekend. Take care, guys.
Ow!